All right, we're going to start a Firepunk racing series that's going to take you guys way back to the beginning. Lynn and I and some of the others, we've been kind of talking about the future so much, about what direction we're going. We thought it'd be fun to take you guys back to where Firepunk started from and what got us excited about racing in the first place. Where does the name Firepunk come from? What was my first truck? How this whole thing started. So that's what today is. Today we're going to try to cover from like the first years of us getting into diesels up until when it was still a hobby, before it was a business for us.
Yeah. So pretty much cover up the Diesel Power Challenge in this segment. When did it start? We're talking, what, 2005-ish maybe? Or?
Well, 2005 is when we started going to events. Dad first bought his truck, which was a year 2000 truck that he bought in summer or fall of 2002. Mm-hmm. And that was something that we got in that truck from my grandpa's Ford with a 350,
hot rod.
Yeah, 351, and we couldn't believe how much. This thing was just a towing monster. And now I drive a stock 24 valve, and they're complete turds. So, that was as an 18-year-old or however old I was back then. It was
only like 2 or 3 years ago, right?
A couple, yeah. It really made an impact on me because I was like, wow, diesel power is fun, because it's like, I just couldn't believe how you could hook a gooseneck trailer on and just stay at 70 mile an hour over the hills, and couldn't do that with the gasser truck that we were doing it with before. So I bought my truck in 2000, winter of 2004, spring of 2005, and that was a 2001, and that was when it really started for me.
Yep. And I remember just that trip home from, where did you buy yours out of? North Carolina, yeah. You were comparing the trucks already, had different gear ratios. Right. And
I had 410s in my 01, and Dad had 355s in his 2000. And side by side, filled up at the same fuel tanks, drove the same speed limit all the way home, and I got like 0.7 mile a gallon better than he did, and I was running 300 RPM more all the way home. And it's like, well, this didn't make any sense. So that goes to show still today why when guys ask for fuel mileage, every truck is different, because here we had two completely stock trucks, and it didn't make sense that the higher gear mileage or the 355 gear ratio got better mileage. But I did not waste a lot of time getting started on modifying my truck, because I was 19 or 20 at the time. We had a ski nautique boat that we had a lot of fun with, and we needed a truck to pull a boat to the river on evenings and weekends. And I was also starting a concrete business, doing decorative concrete that I needed a truck for. And being the kid that I was, pretty quickly you start Googling and figuring out what can I do to add power. And I remember going to Enterprise. I bought a Edge comp box, and I think that was the first mod.
You got a fast pump pretty early on too?
Got a fast, because I drove home and I figured out my truck kept cutting out at full throttle. Mm-hmm. I drove the thing for like a month like that till I finally figured out that my lift pump wasn't even running. So I didn't even kill my VP in the whole process. But those are things that I just learned in the beginning. Put a fast on it, put a comp box on it. And by March, I think I was putting 150 horsepower jammer nozzles, like $350 nozzles on injectors, and get it over to Grandpa's shop. And I was like, hey, I want to put these nozzles on my injectors, and I didn't even know where to find the injectors. Like this was all new to me. I really was pretty green. I grew up on the farm. I understood wrenching and I liked tinkering with stuff, but I knew nothing about diesels. So.
We might jump in here and talk about Grandpa a little bit. We never had any kind of motorsports background growing up, but what we did have was we had a grandpa that could fix anything. Mm-hmm. There was nothing ever quite too broke to fix on the farm. If he wasn't farming, he was in the shop, either fixing something or making something. Like, he built all kinds of contraptions, and that's, I think, where our kind of like figure it out attitude comes from.
Right.
So that's our college education.
Right. And a lot of things, when we didn't know how to do something, we went over to Grandpa's shop and like, what do you think of this? And he's like, well, I think if you do this, Mm-hmm. So that's how we started. And I dug into injectors. He kind of said, well, start by taking the valve cover off and we'll figure it out. He had worked on tractors enough that he understood where to look for. And it was, I needed my truck for work the next day, so there was no taking it to a shop and waiting for it, because I pretty much had to figure it out on my own, because I didn't have a spare vehicle.
It wasn't long after you had the truck that we started noticing the Dodge Cummins that kept going by the house.
Yeah.
And I don't know how long he went by, and we kind of kept going, man, we wonder,
That was Brandon Miller, who actually coined the term Firepunk. He had bought a 99 truck that did a twin turbo build back in the day. He made 648 horsepower with a VP. This is 2002-ish, 2003-ish, which was big numbers back then. And I remember we were playing football or something out in the yard, and I remember seeing Brandon go by pulling a camper, and he was cooking it. And I was like, that is not stock.
Yeah. And then there was also, big dually Duramax running around the community we kept seeing, and we kept going like, man, we kind of like to talk to these guys, but at this point we were just young Mennonite kids that hadn't gotten out just a whole lot yet. And, I'm not sure how we made the connection, but we made, I know we ran into Kevin then at some point and ended up going for a ride in his Duramax, and there was a chip Duramax with a Bill Allison.
03 Duramax with a TTS on it.
Probably made 450 or 500 horse at one point. And I just remember when we first got in that thing and we went for a launch, that was, the hook was set at that point. We were going to empty the bank account to try to go fast. But we got to know those guys then. I think that was when we actually met Brandon then. At that point.
I met him. Yeah, we were running around one Friday night, and we stopped at a church house parking lot, and we both pulled in there. That was the first I ever met Brandon Miller. And Brandon was very instrumental in us building our trucks, because Brandon had a very much of a let's fix it until it's broke mentality, where he loved to build things. And Brandon still to this day, I think, enjoys the build process more than he does actually racing it.
I'd agree. Yep.
It started a whole downhill slope or uphill slope, whichever direction, financially downhill and horsepower uphill slope for us, because
I guess on the long term you could maybe say financially it was uphill, because eventually it led to this, I guess.
Right.
Still lots of unnecessary money spent in the meantime, but have lots of memories of many nights over at Johnny Miller's shop. We'd order wings on wing night, and we'd all have our trucks there and be doing whatever we need to do to them. You fixed multiple head gaskets there, and
I did. In 2005, I did edge jammer nozzles, and I did a transmission. And then that winter, December, is 10 months after I got the truck, we started on a twin turbo project, and that was
high tech twin turbo.
It was it was an HX 3540. It was a 3540 hybrid. That was a big deal back then, where you put a HX40 turbine wheel with an HX 3540 or HX 35 compressor wheel in it, and then we put a S472 on the bottom. And that was something that Brandon talked me into, because we were just casually having dinner one night, and he was like, "You should do twins on your truck." I was like, "Well, I can't afford that, because I've already seen those on the internet, and they're like $6,000." So he was like, I was like, if I could do one for the price of a single turbo, I would. He's like, all right. And I didn't think anything of it until he stopped by the shop, or stopped by the house. I was out in the front yard washing my truck, and he stopped in his little Volkswagen Beetle and Rabbit. And he pops the hatch, and he's got a Borg Warner box there with a 472 turbo. And I was like, dang, that's a nice turbo. What's that for? And he's like, that's for your truck. I was like, wait a second. And he's like, you said if you build one for the price of a single turbo swap, and then we'd do it, right? And I was like, I guess. So then the twin turbo building commenced, and I had friends that worked at Gingway Products. Gary Slayball, he knew how to weld, and we all just hung out at Grandpa's shop pretty much every evening we could, and we fabbed up a very much of a MIG welded Hill-Jack twin turbo setup, but it got the two turbos together. And on the first test drive, we heard this little rattle. Couldn't quite figure out what it was until we I think it was 2 days later, I took the cold pipe back off, and my compressor wheel on the manifold charger looked like a little mouse was in there just eating up the wheels, and figured out that MIG welding twin turbo piping is a terrible idea, and because all the slag on the inside, even though we had beat on it and tried to clean it out, it still came loose. So we learned a lot of things from just being farm boys and just trying everything the hard way. So the things that we do now are a lot from the lessons that we see the hard way. So I still see trucks come in the shop today that we want to look at and laugh, but it always takes me back to how I was when I was a teenager, and that's how we started.
Yeah. We could go on with shop stories for probably a pretty long time, but maybe get into some of our early events and stuff that we went to, and kind of, I guess what kept feeding the addiction or whatever. So, I mean, the first one I really remember going to would have been IRP 2005, I believe.
Yeah, it was like a June event. That was when it was DHRA. I think Eric McBride ran that show. And I had just met Brandon and Kevin and these guys from local around here, and they were like, you guys need to bring your truck and come with us to IRP. And I'm like, didn't know anything about it, but it sounded like a bunch of diesel trucks.
Never been to a drag strip in our lives.
Sounded like a good time. So I had actually ordered a transmission from DTT. It showed up on a Tuesday, and we were leaving Wednesday at noon for in a convoy going to Indy. And I pretty much, as soon as I got the call that the transmission was here, I took off work and I worked all through the night. I twisted the front transmission line. I made a heck of a mess. I was laying underneath the truck in a creeper. The back of my legs were soaked in transmission fluid because I had a huge puddle. I had no idea what I was doing. But I got the trans in, and 9 o'clock Wednesday morning, I was running the Dodge dealer to get a new front transmission line because I had kinked the other one getting it off, and got it all together. And the convoy was pretty much waiting on me by the time I got home and showered and packed my bags and came back. And I think, though, we probably had the most fun we ever had, like running 9 trucks down 70.
We still to this day have a lot of good stories from the convoys and being out there. It was a jolly good time. I'm sure we didn't break any laws or tick anybody off, except for maybe the car that we boxed in between 4 trucks.
We were the people that I now get mad at.
This is true.
Because now I see kids being kids and blowing smoke on the road, and that's not what we want in today's world, because that's not what keeps us in business. We're really trying to promote clean diesel, but we were those kids.
Yeah.
We were kids in a candy store, had just fresh transmission, and we were racing our way from here to Indy, and we were having a ball. So
some of the highlights of that weekend, we turned the road out in front of the hotel, we turned it a different shade of black. I don't know. It was
the hotel owners were out there having a good time with us. They thought it was a ball. The cops rolled through, and they pretty much said, as long as you're not drinking and doing burnouts, we don't care. I mean, it was so different. You would never get that today. I mean, we had so much fun. And this was like the Comp D admins were out there doing burnouts. Tim Turner and Rico. Richard Haltom and Elmo and all these guys that were all very active on the forums and kind of heading up all the conversations were the one out there instigating all that stuff. And that's how it was in 2005. And it was different. And then as this escalated and the crowd got younger, and maybe a little bit more Bud Light burnout style crowd, then soon the people that were organizing the events figured out pretty quickly they can't promote it as just a party burnout fest because it destroys property, and we're starting to get complaints and didn't want to put a black eye on the diesel world. So that's... I look at events now, and it's vastly, vastly different than what it was in 2005, but man, did we have some good times.
Yeah. So then at the drag strip, there was a sled pull there. I don't remember much anything about that, honestly. Really. But first time ever going to a track.
I do.
Tell me a little bit about how that all went, or how fast you went.
I was not planning on racing going out there, and then when I was out there, Brandon's like, "Why don't you race? You're here anyway. I mean, you were racing it on the road, so may as well do it here." I was like, "Okay." And I just remember taking the light for the first time. Your foot is just shaking like a leaf, and you have no idea what you're doing. But this was, in front of people in competition. Is the first time I ever took to a track. And I was absolutely hooked. I ran a 14.6 at 92 miles an hour, I think, my first pass. It didn't launch very hard. And by the end of the day, I was down to a 14.2 at 95, something like that. And that was what my BP truck did. It was just with nozzles and comp box and a built trans.
Yeah.
And I had to go to Walmart and buy some pants because I had shorts on when I showed up, and they said I wouldn't pass tech without pants. And I was like, who knew?
So once again, we were the kids that, show up to the track that we see nowadays, and most people have no idea that you can race anything. Like,
right.
There's bracket trucks, there's index classes. It can be slow, it can be fast. Like, hop in there and have fun. So,
right.
I mean, that's really what set the hook for us. Going 14.4 or whatever is
right.
nothing to write home about these days.
No.
But that was, back then, that was pretty quick.
Right.
But then with your VP truck, you ended up, what's the fastest you went with that truck then?
12:30 at 109, I think is the fastest I ended up with. And that was with compounds and a couple different I had 4 different sets of compounds on it over 4 different years. But overall, I had a ton of fun with that truck. And I learned so much about it because when I broke the trans, I figured out how to fix it myself. And when you broke your trans, or you had we had single disc torque converters. That's what DTT sold back in the day, and we kept tearing up torque converters. And then we pulled the trans.
We may have gained a little bit of a reputation with DTT for just tearing their stuff up, I think.
Yeah. I remember calling Bill and telling him I had put Mach 7s in it. He's like, Mach 7s? He's like, I can remember what he said. I'm not going to repeat it. But he was just like, man, when do you guys stop? And I was like, well, if a little is good, more is better, right? So that was, now I'm on the other side of the fence building transmissions for my customers, and they're calling me, tearing their stuff up. But that's why I always am like, I want to support anybody out there having fun. I'm going to take care of what I do. Any mistakes we make at Firepunk on a transmission that causes a premature failure, we'll fix free and clear. But we're still not going to pay for other people's fun. So you go out there and have fun, race, but every so often you still have to go in there and refresh your transmission. So I started from the other side. I know what it's like to pay my dues. Yeah. And I've made those mistakes.
Yeah, a couple of things I kind of stick out to me of things that we broke. I remember, was it 2009 or so that we were going to TS, and I had a built transmission. And at that point, I guess we didn't think that a flex plate was necessary.
Right.
And we got 90 miles from TS in a big convoy, like probably 30 or 40 trucks at least.
Yeah, probably 40 or
really
50, honestly.
And went to leave the fuel station, and all of a sudden I had nothing but neutral. So I'd broken the flex plate, and we ended up toe strapping the last 90 miles down the interstate.
Yep. He opened his rear slider, or
you opened your rear.
I opened my rear slider so he could see through my windshield, and I just toe strapped him just 70 mile an hour for the last 90 miles.
Perfectly safe, and
we had a truck. Yeah. We had a gooseneck down there that somebody else could drive a race truck home. So we're like, we can get it down there. So we made do. And if you remember, we fixed that flex plate at Grandpa's shop.
Yeah. Do you remember how we fixed it?
Yeah. We took 2 stock flex plate and put it on the lathe and machined the center out of it and welded the.
Pretty much, we made a dual laminated flex plate because
people used to sell those things.
That point, a billet flex plate was the only option, and those were, I don't know,
$450, $500.
Too much money to spend at that time. So
we really did a lot of our things on the bottom of the bottom budget because we were playing outside of our means for sure. Like I couldn't afford a twin turbo truck. Brandon talked me into building a twin turbo truck. So then I blew a head gasket, and then I had to fix a head gasket. And I lived paycheck to paycheck to make my truck as fast as possible. When I did that for 5 years, I did it until I got married, and then
one that sticks out to me on your truck. Well, I remember the night that. I think you had just done a head gasket, and you went on a test drive, and you came back, and there was oil everywhere.
That was bad.
So I don't know,
I did a head gasket. I actually had to do a new head because the head had 16 cracks in it. So I bought a new head from Cummins. I took it to Josh Woodruff. He O-ringed it. We put the thing back in there, and I drove the thing around the block. Everything was good. Retorqued it. The first time I go full throttle, it lost the head gasket out the front and made a oil mess over. I had painted everything. Everything was so nice, and then it was just covered in oil. And man, I was irked. And here what happened is the the fan shroud, I hadn't unbolted it because I was dumb, and I had left a little bit of dirt right up along the edge of the fan shroud on the front of the block, and it was just enough to hold the head up from sealing, and it just blew out right there. So I was able to pull the head, clean the surface back up, fresh head gasket, and go on my way, and it was fine for the next 2 years. But
then the other story that I remember was, I think you were down at you were doing something, pulling a trailer for concrete work or something.
I had a gooseneck dump bed that I did a concrete patio tear out, and I was hauling down to Frank Road quarry, and I went down there, dumped the trailer, and as I was dumping the trailer back and around, I broke my ring and pinion in the rear end. And I'd roll forward about 20 feet and it would clunk real bad. 20 feet, clunk, 20 feet, clunk. And I was like, surely I can make the thing home. And I get up out of the quarry. About the time I get on the on-ramp on 70, this thing, it was bad. Like almost locking up the rear tires. And I put the thing in neutral, coasted to the side, making a heck of a racket. So right there on the side of the road, I took my center caps off, unbolted my axle shafts, pulled my axle shafts out, pulled the rear end out, pulled the whole pumpkin out, threw it in the bed of the truck, put my axle shafts back in, bolted it back on, just put a couple bolts in the rear cover, and drove the thing home in four-wheel drive, front-wheel drive. And just anytime I had to turn, I'd pop it in neutral and coast around the corner and slowly take back off. But I made it home, so
yeah,
that's, I think, some of Grandpa's mentality of we'll make it.
We'll get home somehow.
Yeah. There was no calling tow trucks.
Yeah. So what were some of our other early highlights? Like I know TS09.
Yep.
I think
TS all around. I mean, we went to TS. We went to TS almost every year from since it started, or since we started going in 05, and we'd have the big Comp D cookouts there. That was always a good time, and we were kind of known as the Firepunk kids at that point because we had started. Firepunk.com was just a website for pictures and videos of our drag racing burnouts and whatever our builds, twin turbo builds.
I mean, picture hosting wasn't a lot of super convenient places to do it on the internet at that time.
Yeah,
so.
Before social media, you couldn't just click and upload. You had to have PhotoBucket or another website to host all your pictures and videos, and then link it over to the website for Comp D and Cummins Forum. But we learned a lot. I mean, every year we went faster and faster and faster, and that's why I never won anything, because every time I went to the drag strip, I tried to go faster. And now, that's where Larson, before he was racing the Pro Mod, was racing his truck. He got really good at racing 770 because he was smart enough to just leave it alone at 800 horsepower and go get good at the same power level, and that's how you win trophies.
And we've learned a lot of limits since then, as far as we kind of know if you need a daily driver, here's where you stop.
Right.
Sure, you can have 1,000 horsepower daily driver, but you're going to break it a lot more often, and it's just, a lot of experience that went in it over the time. But I guess back to events, I don't know what year that was that we went out there that it just rained all weekend long, and
it was
2007. Yeah, something like that. I don't know. I think that was the year that Brandon would have taken his S10 out the first year. He'd worked on that.
Girls were there. If you're old, you'll know.
But that was a steel-bodied S10 that he had at that point just had a set of radials on it.
Yeah.
He'd gone on the internet and, these guys are going to go on fast on radials. Well, we didn't understand kind of what it took to make a radial go fast. We didn't know anything about suspension. We didn't know anything about track prep. We didn't know anything about shocks. We didn't know anything about anything.
I mean, looking back now, that truck had some decent equipment, but we had no knowledge to back it up, and the truck never even tried.
Yeah, and it had a 12-valve build in it. Once again, it was kind of like a Brandon thing where we're going to make as much horsepower as we possibly can, and then we'll maybe try to figure out how to make it work later or whatever. But I don't know. We felt pretty big time going down there with a dedicated race truck, hanging out with those guys. And, just lots of good memories. That weekend ended up being a complete bust because of the weather, but still had a lot of fun. Still
Poles got rained out.
Yeah, I remember we were all, crowded in the enclosed trailer eating plates full of crawdads because Elmo had, done a boil, and just, lots of fun. So then what was it? It was soon after that, 2010, or was it late? When did you start Firepunk? Like when?
Well, Firepunk really would have been 2009 to 2010 is when I actually started working on other people's trucks. Because we worked on other people's trucks, but it was just for a hobby. But it would have been winter '09 would have been the first time that when I couldn't do concrete because of the weather, I would work on other people's trucks. And I had gone through our own built transmissions enough that it was familiar enough that I dared go through someone else's. And Tim Barber helped me. He was like, you buy parts from me, I'll tell you how to do it. And he really set me up with a recipe that if I build it this way, it's going to work.
Right.
And there was a couple of things that were really instrumental in getting us started because we really were doing it as a hardcore hobby. And that kind of turned business without a business plan.
Mm-hmm. So originally it was you and Matt Kaufman. Was supposed to be a side gig.
Yeah.
You were still doing concrete. Yeah. Matt was working at Z-Tech full time, and set up shop over on Matt's dad's farm.
Right.
It was a little 30 by 30 shop that we put a lift in, and then the old milk house became the transmission room.
Right.
And
it was really just kind of. The housing market collapsed at the same time that I was starting to work on trucks. So my concrete work significantly slowed down. People stopped spending a lot of their money on their backyard patios and fun projects. And all of a sudden I had no concrete work, but I had plenty of trucks to work on. So I just kept working on trucks. And by summer of 2010 is when you first came to help.
No, it was more, I thought you were on your own for a good little while, but I was pretty sure it was August of 2012 that I came to catch up.
Was it?
At least if I have my dates right, I'm pretty sure that's when it was. That's what I've been going on. That's what I've been going off of recently. But I mean, you had been at it by yourself full time for a year and a half.
Right.
Pretty solid full time at that point, I think.
Right.
And by then, let's see, 2012. By then, I had sold my '04 quad cab, and I had gotten married and whatever. Did more responsible things with my money for a while, and then by 2012 I had bought that single cab project,
right? And
I bought that thing off of eBay for a song because it had a hole in the block and it was a 2-wheel drive and it was a base work model. But that thing's kind of a whole story in itself. I had put quite a bit of work into it, going through it.
6.7 swap.
Yeah, 6.7. So I had been racing a Mustang after I did the initial build, and cracked a piston ring, got the thing too hot. I beat the Mustang though, but didn't know what the puffing and the weird noise was when I got home, but we figured that out pretty quick. And then, I did a 6.7 swap, went through that whole thing. There was very few bolts on that truck that I hadn't touched, and it lasted for all of 6 months or so until
it got stolen.
I was at Roosters one night and it got stolen, and I've never seen it again. So that was the last truck I owned. I guess from there on, I've just...
He's had bad luck because his first truck got stolen.
That is true. It did.
But it got recovered.
Yeah.
He had his quad cab, got the truck, trailer, lawnmowers, everything got stolen from a job site down in Dublin, right out from 50 feet from where you were.
Yeah. And that one was pretty crazy. It was literally right out from under my nose. I have no idea how they got that thing out of there without me knowing it. The only thing I can figure is that they coasted it down the hill a ways before they started it. But
you found that one, a week later or something like that?
Minus all the mowers and trailer, but we did find the truck, so. Yeah.
So if he buys a white Dodge, it's probably going to get stolen. But that's kind of the basis of how Firepunk started. The Firepunk name came from Brandon. Brandon had Firepunk as his screen name going through college and started firepunk.com back in 2000, 2001 already. So Firepunk was a thing long before I even had a diesel truck. And then when I got a truck, he let us have a login for Firepunk so we could load our pictures and videos up on our portion of the page. And Len had a login, and all the guys around here. I mean, there was 8 or 9 of us around here that had trucks, and we kind of became known as the Firepunk guys. And that's why when we started doing Firepunk as a business, I asked Brandon if I could keep the name. And he said, well, I can have Firepunk diesel, but he still wants to own firepunk.com. And that's why, like, Firepunk Engineering, that does all the anteaters and the wiring harness and all that stuff, that's Brandon. And that is a separate business, but we do all of the sales and customer support for Firepunk Engineering because he still has a full-time IT job and does engineering on the side and has 2 employees that work with him. So that's kind of the basis of how this whole thing got started, and a little bit some stories of our racing, how we got our feet wet in it, and things have just progressed over the last 15 years.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the next step we want to go into the next series. We want to start talking about diesel power challenges, how that affected our business, what our thought process was in that, and then how that leads into the UCCs and the racing that we're doing today. So
we could probably go on for DPC stories for a good little while if we can still remember all of it, I guess. But yeah.
So be looking for more series. We're going to just kind of continue this. If you guys have any more thoughts or comments of things that you want to hear us explain or questions, put it in the comments, and we'll be sure to address it on the next series. And then we're going to move forward from there.
Cool.